Okay, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you for hosting another Act 46 meeting. This actually is not a traditional Act 46 meeting. This is a presentation of the letters of agreement that we've been working on. So it's a presentation of a merger. So we've been working the last couple of days, a few of us, on a presentation. This is our first presentation, so it's sort of, you guys are a little bit of like guinea pigs, and so we appreciate that. This presentation will be given again in Guilford, or perhaps an improved version of it in Guilford over the next month and a half, as well as in various other towns. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm the chair of the committee, and my name is Alice Laughlin. Do we want to go around the table and say who we are?
Sure. Beth Bristol. I am vice chair of the Guilford board and the Guilford representative to the Act 46 study committee.
And I'm Mark Truhan, vice chair of the Brattleboro Town School Board and representative to the study committee of the Brattleboro Town School Board.
Alice Rivas, chairman of the Guilford School Board and an alternate for the Act 46 committee.
Ron Staley, superintendent of schools.
I'm Frank Rucker, the business administrator.
I'm Lyle Holliday, director of curriculum. Erin Kachak, school board member, clerk.
Since we have a small group, do you want to quickly introduce yourselves, or however you're comfortable doing so? You're free to do so if you wish to.
Well, I'm Eric Findell, Guilford School Board.
And I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the BUHS director for Brattleboro, for BUHS District 6.
Angela Johnson, member of the Guilford School Board. Kinsey LaRock.
Ron Linkert.
John Gagnon, principal of the school.
I'm Susan James.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just a
everyone for coming in.
taxpayer.
So why don't we get going, and what I'll do is start going through the slides, the presentation, and committee members should jump in. Do know that since we're doing so many of these presentations, study committee members who are already committed to a lot of meetings on this topic are not coming to all of these. So the next time we're in front of you, it might be a different crew who are. Dummerston is not represented at this table, and I think that's it. Okay,
She might be coming.
she's going to be coming later. She had a family situation. Okay. So what we'd like to share with you tonight is what we've been working on the last year. And as you can see, it's 4 towns joining together to educate our kids. And why now, you might ask? Well, Act 46 came up and was signed into law in June of 2015, and it is the law. Act 46 was designed, can you go back a little bit? Act 46 was designed to address the increasing cost and widespread inequities of education across the state. Act 46 is an act relating to making amendments to education funding, education spending, and education governance. It requires districts to evaluate the education provided to their students, its cost to their taxpayers, and its sustainability by 2018. It aims to simplify the educational governance system, and it provides districts options on how to go forward. The 5 towns of the WSESU created an official study committee over about a year ago to figure out how best to comply with the law. Over the last year, the study committee has met more than 30 times. So what is WSESU? And I suspect the vast majority of the folks in this room right now know, but I'll go over it anyway. WSESU is the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union. It has the administrative responsibility for the town school districts in our region. General oversight of the SU falls to the superintendent, Ron Staley, who is appointed by the local boards, a supervisory union, otherwise often known or referred to as SU, is an administrative planning and educational service unit for 2 or more school districts. Each of our towns, Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and Vernon, constitutes a school district with an elected board that establishes policy and presents the annual spending plan to voters for approval. What is a school district? There are a lot of terms which actually get quite confusing when you start digging into the law, and they're not common to many people. A school district is a public governing unit. It's its own independent municipality. It's responsible for providing for the education of all students residing within its boundaries. It's organized to provide for the education of resident students in all grades, pre-K through 12, or in some subset of grades. It has one publicly elected governing board for the entire district, and it proposes a budget, which is only adopted if approved by the electorate. What is a school? A building in which education occurs. It's operated either by a school district and its publicly elected board, or a private entity and its board of directors. A school is a location for community involvement, activity, and traditions. What about Brattleboro Union High School? Within the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, we also have a union school district, which is the Brattleboro Union High School District Number 6. This district board is made up of members from all the supervisory union's towns. Their budget is voted annually, and all citizens in the union district can participate in the balloting. The schools included in the Brattleboro Union High School District 6 are the Brattleboro Area Middle School, Brattleboro Union High School, and the Wyndham Regional Career Center. So the study committee learned a lot, and one of the early things we learned is that the law requires districts to create simplified governance structures that, and I'll go through the list because it's important, provide substantial equity in the quality and variety of educational opportunities statewide, lead students to achieve or exceed the state's education quality standards adopted as rules by the State Board of Education at the direction of the General Assembly, maximize operational efficiencies through increased flexibility to manage, share, and transfer resources with the goal of increasing the district-level ratio of students to full-time equivalent staff, promote transparency and accountability, deliver at a cost that parents, voters, and taxpayers value.
Sure. So what does a simplified governance structure mean? One board looking at the programming and opportunities for students in all buildings, basing student outcomes on one continuous improvement plan, one hiring structure for all employees, retaining high-quality staff, removing the obstacles from regulatory agencies such as the IRS and labor standard boards regarding shared employment, cohesive leadership team creating capacity for meeting the challenges in all schools, leveraging the benefits through previous consolidation in special education through consolidating the majority of regular education programs, and reviewing policy and strategy through a cohesive lens. So, like, amongst many of the things that the study committee looked at, this is a list, and I won't read through them all, but I think it's important to know that we really did exhaust this long list of areas and looked at how our schools were similar in these areas, how our schools were different in these areas, and then what we would like to see as a best practice in a new unified district.
Could I just make reference to those articles? So in the articles, we have some attachments, appendices. And, so it's after page 11. Where you have program overview, enrollment trends, and program opportunities. So it's these next 3 pages where it has a program overview. So if you want to get more specific in terms of that data that Beth is referring to, you got it on those pages.
Yeah, so it lays out what kind of programmings and resources are available at each of the different schools and compares them. And that was a kind of a starting point that we kicked off our meetings with. Along those same lines, we found differences in the equity in terms of what we offer our students. Also differences in the quality and the variety of educational opportunities in our schools. We also found differences in costs and spending. So there's also attachments in there that look at per pupil costs. And that leads us to sustainability. So if we look at student enrollment, back in 2002, we were just over 3,000 K through 12 students enrolled in our district, or in our supervisory union. In 2016, that was down to almost 2,400, which is a decrease over 14 years of 22%, which is significant. And so this includes Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, which is Brattleboro Union High School, the middle school, the Career Center, and then the elementary schools in Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and Vernon. And here's a graphical representation of that. This is from the Agency of Education census data in 2016, and it references from the year 2002 through the year 2015. And for our interest, the yellow line is Guilford, and we should note that in the year 2013 is when our 7th and 8th graders moved to BAM, so that large drop is due to that. If you did pick up a copy of the pamphlet at the door, you'll see that same graph without the middle school students, so it's just the K through 6, and you don't see that drop. So that's worth noting, but the trend is pretty obvious. This is BUHS's enrollment trend, again 2002 to 2015. So correlating to decreasing enrollment is increasing costs. So you can see here we have data going back to 2005. The WSESU schools were spending on average, or per pupil spending of almost $11,000, and in 2015 it's up to almost $16,000, which is a 45% increase. And you can see we're comparing that to the state average for the same numbers. So why keep our smaller schools open? This is a section right out of the Act in the law. Vermont recognizes the important role that small schools plays in the social and educational fabric of its community. It is not the state's intent to close its small schools, but rather to ensure that those schools have the opportunity to enjoy the expanded educational opportunities and economies of scale that are available to schools within larger, more flexible governance models. And this, I think, rings true so strongly here at Guilford in terms of talking about the social core of our community and also the inequities with the surrounding schools. So carrying on, the presence of multiple public schools within a single district not only supports flexibility in the management and sharing of resources, but it promotes innovation. For example, when individual schools within a district can more easily develop a specialized focus, which in turn increases opportunities for students to choose their school best suited to their needs and interests. And again, out of Act 46. So within the Act, within the Act, there were many options available to us. And so we started looking at what was called the preferred model. And we looked at the other ones as well. And we've considered the unique situation of our Vernon neighbors who either join us and would therefore lose their school choice, or to go it on their own and keep their school choice. So you'll see as our presentation goes on that Vernon is not included in this proposal, and that's because of the outcome of those studies and Vernon's decision to go it on their own to retain their school choice.
So, as Beth said, we have created a merger proposal, which you will most likely be voting on. It's the merger that we believe is the best option for the kids. It's a merger that complies with the law, allows small schools to stay open, improves educational opportunities, and addresses the many concerns in the community. It's a merger we think gives communities more value, and it builds on our strengths, retains our school cultures, and addresses our weaknesses. And it offers an opportunity for increased community involvement. So that brings us to leadership councils. And leadership councils are something we have built into our articles of agreement, and I believe are unique for articles of agreement across the state. School leadership councils will be established at each school to provide local input on school-specific programs and activities. The councils will have a chair, vice chair, clerk, and committee representatives. The district board will actively engage with district communities and individual school leadership councils. The district board will regularly send a representative member to individual leadership council meetings. So who's on the leadership councils? The school principal, one staff member appointed by the district board chair, 3 community members nominated at town meeting and appointed by the district board to serve for 1-year terms, and 1 student representative selected by the school principal for participation as appropriate or necessary, or as topics dictate. So how would our school governance structure be different from what it is today? As you see on the left, we have sort of the current situation. We've got 7 separate school boards: Brattleboro, Guilford, Brattleboro Union High School District 6, Putney, WSESU, Vernon, and Dummerston. If we were to merge, there would be 1 district board with representatives from Brattleboro, Guilford, Putney, and Dummerston. And then there would be 8 leadership councils. So right now, I'm going to just talk about Brattleboro for a moment. This would give, for example, Brattleboro significantly more community involvement, because right now they have 1 board for their 3 elementary schools. This would create a leadership council at each school. Okay. Right now, the articles of agreement that we've been working on and voted to send up to the Board of Education to get their approval is very solid. But there is one article that, well, there are a couple, but one of the key articles that we have been talking about the last couple of meetings is how we want our towns represented. So there are really 2 options right now that we are discussing. One is proportional and the other is a modified version of that. The proportional is based obviously on population. It's got 5, and we're talking about an 8-member board. It's got 5 Brattleboro residents, 1 Putney, 1 Guilford, and 1 from Dummerston. The modified version allows for at-large members from any town, has 2 from Brattleboro, 1 from Putney, 1 from Guilford, 1 from Dummerston, or 3 from Brattleboro. Yeah, 3 from Brattleboro, and 3 at large. Okay? So we've listed pros and cons for each of these, but of course pros and cons are a matter of opinion. But the basic concerns tend to be in these realms. For the proportional, the pros are that the vote is not commingled. Each town elects their own representative. So the town enthusiastically supports 1 representative. The cons are that 1 town holds a simple majority. So there's only, for example, 1 Guilford resident at that table. Brattleboro has 5. In the modified version, there's a potential for increased small town representation because those 3 at-large members could be from anywhere. The cons are the ballots are commingled, all representatives are from all towns, elected by all residents across the 4 towns.
So to maybe explain
Yeah.
that in just a little bit more detail, because we've spent so much time on it. The commingling is where I think we got confused, and are awaiting still further clarification. But with a commingled ballot, it would mean that if I were to run as the Guilford representative, my name would be on the ballot in all towns, in Guilford, Dummerston, Putney, and Brattleboro, and all communities would be voting for me or any other Guilford representative that might be on the ballot. So theoretically, all people are electing all representatives, whereas in the proportional model, excuse me, only the Guilford community would be voting for their Guilford representative, and the Putney community would be voting for the Putney representative.
May I ask a question for clarification? So that 3 at large, in theory, Putney could have 2, Guilford could have 2, Dummerston could have 2, or 1 from each one, or they could all come from Guilford.
Right.
So if I were running for this, I would have to advertise in all of those towns rather than just Guilford, which could be really cost prohibitive.
Yes.
Okay,
Is this
just-
different from what was in the, are they all at large in what you have on the screen?
In the
Because my
modified, there are 3 at large.
Is this, okay, because
There are 9, I've spoken correctly.
my understanding was that all of them are at large because you get voted on by the at-large district. And from the Supreme Court case law that I've read, when you're voted on at large, you're not actually technically a legal representative of that district. You represent the entire district. All that is a residency requirement. So is that still what the study committee is proposing, or is this a reaction to new information from Donna?
No, but this is,
The one on the
Okay.
right is the same one that we had in the
Okay.
um,
So
articles, except Brattleboro should have 3, not 2.
Okay, so it's a little bit misleading because those are not, it's not a Brattleboro rep, it's not a Putney rep, it's not a Guilford rep. It's just a resident from that area, but all of them are at large, correct?
right, well, so it doesn't say, these are residents of the towns.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's. So what about Vernon? Vernon has asked to be released from the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, District Number 6, in order to maintain their existing school choice. They are not included in the proposed Articles of Agreement for unification. They will be individually responsible for complying with the requirements of Act 46, and they will now pay tuition for students attending Brattleboro Union High School Number 6, which has traditionally, for the last, I don't know how many years, has been about, what, 70 to 80%. So there are going to be 2 votes, at the very least 1 vote, and I'll explain that. The first vote to release Vernon from the WSESU and the Brattleboro Union High School District Number 6. And then if all towns vote independently to let them be released, then there is another vote to unify Brattleboro, Putney, Dummerston, and Guilford school districts. And each of those towns need to vote independently to unify. If they do not, then the merger does not go forward. So what about the school portion of town meeting? This is something that has caused great concern to community members. Town meeting is something that Vermonters are very fond of. There's a long tradition. In town meeting, in this merger setting, a vote on the individual school budget will no longer take place at your town meeting. 3 community members are nominated for the leadership council at town meeting. Community discussion and budget input can take place during a pre-town meeting, which would be a far more, an expanded version of that meeting that currently happens in towns. Leadership councils and district board representatives would present the budget then. The district budget will be voted on separately in each town via Australian ballot on town meeting day. So there are a lot of things a new unified board could look at that we just have not really focused on. We've touched on a lot of these topics and more, but these are really the realm of a new unified board, if one were to happen. So there are some really exciting things that could happen if we were unified. One, we could, we're gonna have preschool in all the schools. There's only now one school in all of these districts who have a pre-K classroom. We could do magnet schools. We could give all of the schools universal meals. The list is vast, and each of these topics could take a serious amount of attention.
And it's meant as an example of some of the topics that a new unified board might tackle once they're organized. Some of the things that came up in our discussions about equity and equality amongst schools, these were the topics that came up where we may not be equal. So it's just an example. Sure. So some ways that our schools will be different, if we look at the before and after. And we just talked about pre-K. Right now there's only one school, and after unification there would be expansion of pre-K classes into additional schools. And Guilford is one of the schools that's certainly being considered for that. Currently, personnel is hired by a single district. Afterwards, personnel can be shared among schools depending on need. Currently, additional programs in many cases are too expensive to add to a small school budget. I think we experience that here at Guilford pretty frequently. And once unified, additional programming costs would be spread across more students to spread the cost out and making them more affordable. And then the final example is that challenges that are faced by individual schools are currently handled alone, and those challenges could be problem solved through a wider lens in a unified district. Unique to Guilford. So there's one small, not so small thing that makes Guilford a little bit different than some of the other towns, which might be a more pressing issue. Is back in 2013, as we mentioned earlier, we made the decision to send our 7th and 8th graders to bands. And every year the school board invites those students and parents back here to provide input and tell us how it's going, and resoundingly we get overwhelmingly positive feedback, and that comes at a cost. So when the agreement was first put into place in it was either 12 or 13, it was due to expire in 2017. And between the start and the expiration, it was a phased increase in tuition. And so currently we're up to an $11,520 tuition per student, and that has a $300,000 tuition cap. So currently we're very strongly utilizing that cap. We have 47 students currently enrolled in BAMS, and the tuition cap is at 26 students. So you can see we're getting a significant cost benefit from that agreement right now. As I said, it expires in 2017. The state law requires us to pay the going rate for BAMS tuition, which is currently almost $15,000. And again, a tuition cap could be set into place at 33 students, which would put us at $486,750 by the year 2019-2020 school year. That would be almost $190,000 increase to our current school budget, and that will be significant. If we were to move forward with unification, the tuitioning would go away because we would all be one school district. So there would no longer be the need to tuition our students. To me, if you can go back there, this is one of the number one I wouldn't say the number one draw, but it's at the forefront of my mind as a Guilford School Board representative, where our financial duties are, you know, pretty high on our priority list, and this, I think, weighs heavily on all of us. And so, to be honest, the long-term viability of the Guilford Central School would be at risk without unification. It would be a significant tax increase to us, to absorb that almost $190,000 increase to our budget. So that's worth mentioning.
So can I ask a question? Well, we're very close to being done. Do you want to, and we're going to open it up for questions. Okay, so to consider change is to consider growth. The realities of our school systems are changing. We must be willing to embrace and adapt to change so we can continue to best serve the needs of our students. And that was the presentation. And we would be very welcome. We encourage you to ask questions.
We're obviously doing this in Guilford, so those are our stats. How does this relate to, if you were in the other towns in the district, are other towns in a similar situation that Guilford is in, being so close to a cap and having the school really in jeopardy unless we join? So are other towns that are not in that position?
Yeah, I think Guilford's unique in that the other schools either have their own 7th and 8th, in both Putney and Dummerston, they house their own 7th and 8th graders. So they're not paying a tuition to bands for their students to go. So that is a unique situation just to Guilford. You know, the rest of the presentation talking about the equality and the shared resources and all of that would pertain to everybody, but that one particular slide about the bands agreement is unique to us.
And that makes me think about the tax impact on all the districts. I think we should spend a little time on that. You know, we can go information. I'm going to ask Frank Rucker to outline this.
Sure. So as Beth was saying, you know, that potential increase in a tax rate to Guilford is part of what this analysis helps us understand. So you see on line 28 here, on the left side, we've got numbers 1 through 34. Line 28 is the Guilford town school district fiscal year 16 tax rate $1.69.4, and that's under what was passed and what we just actually wrapped up the fiscal year at. This proposed merger with an incentive of an 8-cent reduction that's in the law would provide a lower rate of $1.63, as you see there. And so the issue around school funding and program expansion is centered on this school funding law, which is essentially it distributes taxes to our residents based on a cost per student calculation. And it's pretty simple. In the aggregate, meaning if we were a merged system, that first line represents all of our budgets. The 52 million excluding Vernon, based on what Alice had just described. There are revenues that help offset what is considered the tax-funded amount to operate schools. That would be things like at Brattleboro Union, tuition income from Dover, from Marlboro, from other schools. It would be special education grants, transportation grants. As a system, that's 14 million. So what we do for funding any school in Vermont is we look at our operating budget, we subtract those revenue sources that are available that do not directly come from the tax, school property tax, and then we divide by the number of kids. So it is this 1, 2, 3, and 4 that I was just referring to. Spending that's presented to the public through the school board process, reduced by revenues that are not directly from the school property tax, gets a net number, it's called education spending, and we divide that by the number of students that are in each individual district. And that's the issue that's problematic for schools that have seen 20% decline in enrollment, but not a 20% decline in spending. Very few schools have seen a substantial decline in spending, and yet our enrollment has been declining significantly. Therefore, as you saw in an earlier screen, cost per student is up, and I'm sure you all know your taxes have been up. And this formula accounts for that pressure. And so one of the advantages for merger, the primary advantage is, as the presentation indicates, it's really about improving educational opportunity because it provides for the ability to regionalize programs. When you're an individual employer, a separate district with a separate student count, here in Guilford it's 120 students in our K through 6. I think actually we're down to below 100 now. And then we have approximately a little less than 40 students in the middle school that we still count here at Guilford, and they're going right now to BAMS. But that's where the serious constraints are around bringing in new programs to Guilford, an early ed program, a language program. And it's because of this funding formula that says if you only have 120 students in Guilford, you're gonna take spending divided by 120 students, and you're gonna see these relatively large tax impacts. For example, that 190,000 that referred to divided by 150 students is about $1,200 per student. That translates into about $120 per $100,000 tax assessment for each resident. There is an income sensitivity provision that each individual may or may not be subject to that has an impact on that as well. So the alternative is in a merged system, those individual kind of silos, those borders around school funding go away, and program development the cost impact of program development is over the whole system, which in our case is 2,319 students as of that date. So, Guilford is about 5% of that number. And the tax impact as we spend is substantially mitigated over the larger system. And we have a couple of schedules in the document that you have available that sort of identify what, if you added a foreign language program in just one school, what the tax impact would be versus if you did it over a regional system. So there's a little background on that.
I have a couple of questions, but I'll start.
Could I actually ask you to say,
Yep.
share your name and the town you're from?
Sure, Cheryl Redmond from Guilford. Back to the voting process, the two votes that you mentioned, I just would like some clarification on that. So you said there are going to be two issues, and the first one will be to release Vernon from the union. So I do understand that they themselves have voted that they don't want to be part of the union, but the other towns have to allow that to happen. So it's possible that if the rest of the towns don't allow that, then they would have to join the union. Is that true?
They would stay in the union, and then they'd have to be a decision whether they are part of the merger process.
It would get very complicated.
So being in the union and being part of the merger are two separate.
Yeah, it's the Union High School District. That's what they voted to remove themselves out of.
Okay.
And then the second vote is to confirm that by each of the Union High School districts, which would be Brattleboro, Guilford, Dummerston, Putnam.
Okay.
So it's a two-phase process.
And the second phase is what you're talking about, the vote whether or not to unify Guilford, Putney, Dummerston, and Brattleboro?
That would become the third phase.
Okay.
So Vernon did their vote.
Right,
The next two votes would be to release them and then to merge.
right. So like when we go to when we go to vote, those are gonna be the two things that we,
Yeah, and it's actually, they're gonna actually be on two different dates.
okay.
It looks like the withdrawal date would be sometime in December or early January. And then the merger vote will be on town
Town
meeting.
meeting.
Are these votes all by Australian ballot? Or do the 20 people 200 people that show up for the town meeting get to make the decision?
They're Australian ballot.
All three of those votes
Yeah.
are Australian, okay, great.
So why would we not wanna release them from the union? I mean, why would?
It's law, right, that we have to vote to allow
But
them.
you asked why would you not want to?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, if they voted that they want to be released from the union,
Mm-hmm.
then,
See,
okay. I'm just trying
I
to,
think it's a formality, it seems strange to all of us too, that we would have to vote them out, but
Okay.
it's a formality.
and then the second vote to unify the other 4 districts is in effect voting for Act 46,
Merger.
the merger, okay. All right.
You have another question?
Oh, I'm just thinking about the Vernon thing. So if there's a lot of assets from a tax roll point of view, and we release Vernon out of this conglomeration, then they get to keep those benefits of those taxes of that facility, whatever you want to call it. So if the tax money from that facility was coming into the big pot, that could lower those numbers that we were talking about that everyone would have to pay. Am I correct in that assumption?
So there's a debt to asset issue
Mhm.
as part of the withdrawal agreement that Vernon would have to sign off with Brattleboro Union High School. And Frank's going to speak to that, but we've had our attorney as well as the Vernon attorney look at that, and it's essentially a wash between the assets and the debt.
Okay.
Yeah, and your thinking is, relative to that schedule, is logical. And, but what might not be apparent is, as a union member of a high school, the district number 6, Brattleboro Union High School, counts those Vernon kids in that budget development and taxation calculation. Under a non-union model, the BUHS district does not count those kids any longer. However, they receive tuition revenue from Vernon. So they lose, the UHS loses kid counts, but it increases its revenue substantially. And those two factors essentially make it a pretty close to a break-even scenario for both sides, for Vernon and the other towns.
Okay, just curious.
Good question.
Yeah.
Joanne Tyler, Dummerston, but I work in Guilford, so. I'm just wondering, will Vernon have to pay for their 7th and 8th graders to go to BAMS?
They would tuition them.
They would tuition them just like they would the high school.
Questions or thoughts? Yeah?
I've got a question about a different topic, if that's okay. Back to the representation structure, just would like some clarification on the 2 choices for representation. So, I think I understand the proportional representation, but then when you were asking about the modified representation, do I understand it then that they are all at large?
They're all at-large, meaning that they're voted on by everybody, by the at-large community.
So it's one person who lives in Putney, say. There can only be one person from Putney, but when they're on the board, they're kind of just representing the whole, they're not just representing Putney.
So I confuse things by using the word rep.
Okay,
Okay, so we've had several conversations about that. They are representing the entire community.
okay,
At some point, they are determined there will be members of this board sort of attached to leadership councils. So they will be more aware of what's going on in one specific school as opposed to rather than another.
So they may be the voice of Guilford, the Guilford member who resides in Guilford
right.
would likely be the liaison with the Guilford Leadership Council, so would likely bring forward to the board the Guilford perspective.
Okay.
This is page 7 in the.
It's in here too?
Yeah.
I copied it down from there, so I was
Yes.
just looking at that. Okay.
Do you have a follow-up question?
I'm just still, I guess I just have to, I'm just still trying to figure out how, trying to weigh the pros and cons of both options and I mean, I think with the proportional one, it's pretty clear that Guilford, doesn't get much of a say.
Yeah, so, I think each community that's represented even on the study committee has a little bit of a different viewpoint. So I'll now speak from personally as the Guilford representative. But when we first approved the Articles of Agreement, I think everybody was for that modified or hybrid model because of those at-large and the opportunity to have additional representation from your community. But as we learned more about what that meant and the fact that it really was at large for everybody and the fact that Guilford would not really be electing the Guilford representative and that it could be elected by everybody else, then the Guilford board started to think a little bit differently and say, well, we may actually be in favor, even though it only gives us one representative in the proportional model. We may actually favor that model because we know that that individual is elected from the town of Guilford and will directly reflect Guilford's perspectives. So it is an interesting dynamic between the two different methods. It's not as it may seem at face value.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
either way, we don't get much of a voice in what happens overall in the district. I mean, that's a big concern for me, is that either way, our interests are not, we have less control over what happens with what goes on in the school, and we have less say, so.
Well, I just think of the Union High School board, 5 members from Brattleboro and then 1 from each of the surrounding towns. Same sort of configuration. Quite frankly, that board operates as a unified board. They don't look at, like Sean Murphy, he had to leave, but he's representing Guilford. Obviously, he looks out for the interests of Guilford, but he's also looking out for the high school, middle school, the Carissa kids
Right.
of the unified district.
He doesn't even speak at the town meetings. When we have a Guilford town meeting, he doesn't come and speak at he's not part of like the board. If he was really for Guilford, he should get up and speak for, with the board of Guilford. So, I don't have kids at the high school. I'm not involved with the high school, so I can't speak to how much the interests of the high school are, of Guilford are weighed into what goes on at the high school yet, but I don't see a big presence,
I think as a board member there, me being part of the process, I see that from each of the town reps. But I also see this psychology of it's a unified district. It's really for the enhancement of all our students. So, Sean was very instrumental in the whole discussion about BAM's tuitioning the Guilford middle school students. That was something that he really helped navigate.
Right, and that's cost a lot of money. I mean, that was partly sold to us on the basis of it being a cost-saving measure, which I'm not arguing that hasn't been a great experience for all the kids, but, on the cost end of it, that's a whole nother story, but.
Did you want to add
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that the idea of having a leadership council is more of a cushion than what the BOHS district board has right now. And I think that that is where the Guilford voice is going to be the strongest. And I see that as being kind of feeding into our, whatever we choose, hybrid or proportional.
So what interaction does the leadership or what influence does the leadership council have with a unified board? I mean, what can they actually accomplish other than give opinions about what they, think should go on at their
Well, I think that, I mean, personally, I just feel that if the Union District Board were not taking into account what each community leadership council was saying that they need for their school, this wouldn't work. I mean, so I'm standing by that as kind of that's how it's gonna be oiled and run. I mean, that's what's gonna make the wheel turn. It's made up of people that are working in the school, and it's made up of community members and also a member of the unified district.
And I don't think we're gonna see situations where it's gonna be like Brattleboro against the small schools, because it's, I mean, we have all these schools that we have to maintain, and we're gonna be standardizing a lot of our programming and resources and everything. So it's not gonna be like, well, we're gonna get Spanish and we're not gonna let them get Spanish. Like that's not how it would work. So
I don't think that would be what anyone would say.
yeah, so I mean, even decisions on capital plans and spending is if Guilford School needed a new roof, Brattleboro's not going to say, sorry, we're not going to give you a new roof because we want to add a new wing onto one of our schools. Like I think you have to think of it as one big unified district that now operates all of these schools, and they're going to think of it like that. Well, this school needs this, and so that's what we're going to do, and that school needs this, and then at the same time we're kind of working on standardizing our programs and resources all at the same time. So I understand the perception of Brattleboro has this supermajority, but I think we have to try to separate ourselves from that and think it's a whole shift. It's like a philosophy shift of instead of thinking about it as Guilford School and Brattleboro School, it's all of our schools.
And all of our kids.
And all of our kids, right.
Right. Well, I guess my main concern is mostly it's not an us, I'm not thinking of it as an us versus them mentality, but it's just that the fact that when we become a very minority member in the larger group, then our ability to make decisions for ourselves about how we want to spend our tax dollars is, we're not going to have the same amount of say that we have now. That's just how it is.
Yeah, and I think for me, it also goes back to, well, if we don't do this, it's going to be a lot worse, because then we may not exist at all. So for me, that's really what it comes down to. Are there going to be uncertainties with this? Absolutely. Is it going to be a learning process? Are we going to have to figure it out? Absolutely. There's a lot of unknowns that we're going to learn as we go, because we've never done this before. There's a lot more certainty when you look at the numbers for not merging that scare me a lot more than looking at the uncertainties of merging.
It boils down to really what we advocate, how we advocate from the leadership committee and our representative to the board and say these are our needs and this is what we need, and it comes right, all the way down, or all the way up or down, however you say, from our principal to administrate, all the administration will say this is what Guilford needs for our school. And it is going to be rocky at times, and not everyone's feelings are going to be wonderful, but I think that I would rather have a school present in our community where it is the hub of our community. And I think this is a starting point to ensure that we can have our school.
And nothing in this consolidation is going to eliminate the parents' concerns. If they have a certain topic that they want to see brought before the board, they're by all means welcome to write a letter to the consolidated board, much as they do now to independently.
And come to the meetings.
And come to the meetings. There's usually to stop them from voicing opinions.
I think that's going to be the leadership council is going to be right here in the schools. So
And the leadership leadership councils would actually have, I think, more ability to interact and infiltrate themselves in the school than we do as a board, because we have very specific duties assigned to us that we can't, and lines that we can't cross. You know, we're responsible for this and this and this. Whereas the leadership council is gonna have the ability to really get engaged and involved in things that as a board, we don't make decisions on programming and curriculum and that kind of stuff. And I think the leadership council can really get engaged and involved in a whole lot more than what we do now. And although they don't have like voting power, they're gonna have influential power to bring their voice to the district board and make a stand for what our community needs.
So if you haven't yet done so, if you're interested more in the leadership councils, the description is on page 9, it's Article 15. And so that would be a good read for you.
And actually, that reminds me of a discussion that's come up in the study committee is, so what happens if we don't do this merger? It is a law, so at some point, the state is gonna then determine what we're gonna do to comply with the law. And so if the state were to come along down the road in 2018 or 20 or whatever the time frame is, they're not gonna have Article 15 in their Articles of Agreement. That's for sure. They're not huge advocates, I don't think, of that article, but it's something that our committee feels really, really strongly about. And we've pushed back multiple times saying, no, we want this article in there, it's important to us. And so I think it's important to note that if we do nothing, that the state will make that decision for us. So this is our opportunity to write our own future and to determine the way that we're gonna go without kind of being told.
Don't worry, we're from the state, we're here to help you.
Yeah.
Inez,
So, I noticed, and
can
I
you
have
say
a question.
who you are? and where you're from?
Inez from Dummerson. I have a question about the leadership council slide, because it seemed to enumerate how many people from the community would be on it, and the articles don't. And I have concerns also coming from a small town that, may be relevant to Guilford, and that's that if this does end up being our document, I think it's not protective enough for small towns. Under either of these governance structures, I agree that we have very little control over our budget and what happens to us. I would like to see a longer period of time in which school closures are prohibited. And frankly, that school closure provision doesn't prevent the closure of a middle school or a grade. And I would like to see maybe more members of the community, not just 3. If you're willing to put, the number of community members on these leadership councils onto a slide, why not put it into the articles?
It's on page 10.
Oh, it is?
Yep, the second line of
I
the top
missed it.
paragraph.
I'm so sorry. And I do notice that it's 3 out of, it seems like a total of 5. You're not, 3 is not a very large number. Maybe have more community members on there. And my concern also is that the only way to take care of the small town voice is maybe to include other towns in this proposed merger, so that the small towns have equal voice. Because if the unified board is made up of members of the study committee who are all very nice people who have all promised that they're not going to close small schools, that would be great. But I'm thinking 5 or 10 years down the road, when y'all may be worn out by your term of service, and we will have an entirely newly elected unified board. If this is a board that's elected after taxes have gone up to pay for all this new programming, will those newly elected members be people who want to clamp down on spending? And then they will be thinking about whether they really want to pay for a roof, or whether they really want to pay for a boiler in a small school, whether it's in Brattleboro or Guilford or Dummerston. I think it would be ignoring reality to say that those cost decisions are not going to be made with somebody's thinking cap on. it just seems naive to say that, oh, we're gonna fund to the max, every single school, every single thing that they need out of a capital fund. That's simply not necessarily true. So it's a concern. I don't know if the study committee has thought about looking to reach out to other towns so that maybe we have
We
towns
have
that equal the voting power of Brattleboro, which has really a 65% voting power.
we have had conversation with Marlboro and
So in the future, that could certainly happen. People, other towns could request conversations about merging with us. That has certainly been discussed and is a possibility. These other towns would have to be sort of in our region, and right now there have been no other towns who've reached out to us in our current process, so time will tell whether that is something that develops.
And there is an element of time is of the essence too. I mean, we wouldn't sit around for 3 years and wait to the deadline to come before doing something. So, we're being proactive and getting it underway.
Well, part of the process when you elect the super board is going to be to choose people who are going to have the mindset of representing an expanded district. And it's not simply going to be like one of us. I come from Brattleboro, I represent 3 schools. The other boards represent, for the most part, only 1 school each. We at the Brattleboro Town School Board have learned to think of a larger globally. It's a small world.
you're a little globe.
Yeah, little globes at different spins. But we try to balance the needs of one school off against the needs of another. We establish capital plans that reach out for 10, 15, 20 years. The same thing is going to be incumbent upon the super board to do the same planning, but for a greater number of schools than 3. We'll have up to, 8 schools? 9 schools? So it's not impossible, but it just requires a little bit more work. And this is where the leadership councils are going to come in, and they will advocate for their particular capital project, be it a language teacher, or be it a new roof, or a pellet boiler seems to be in vogue these days. And frankly, like I said, yes, no, maybe, we'll have to work it out, find out what kind of grants are out there, but it's just going to require a little bit more responsibility and cohesive effort on the part of those people that are elected.
It's just very hard to go from 100% control over your budget, over your teachers, over your principal, to 10%.
Or
And-
0% when the school gets shut down. So-
Right. Or
Well, when you think
0%,
about it,
right.
you really don't have 100% control over school budgets as it is, because we have outside factors, labor negotiations, contracts for the teachers, contracts for the non-teaching staff, insurance rates are going all over the place, fuel costs, utilities. There's a number of outside influences that sort of take absolute control of a budget right out of our hands simply to keep the schools open and operating.
How are the high school?
Is there anyone else who has a question? No? Okay, Ness, we're gonna wrap it up in a few minutes, just so.
Yeah, it's just a question I don't know the answer to. How are the high school directors elected? Is it by each district?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's not at large. That's by district elections for the high school. Yeah, I was curious about that.
I would just actually ask you to look in your appendix. In Appendix A, I cited the program overview sheet. That's 2 or 3 pages, and then the enrollment trends that you've seen. So this is a little after page 11 and 12. So probably about after the enrollment chart is another 2 pages called Act 46 Study Committee Expanded Opportunities. A chart like this. I'd have you take a look at this, and it's been really thoughtful in terms of how we could share resources in a cost-effective way like the first one is with Head Start preschool classes. You can't really do much with Head Start here in Guilford or Dummerston because they don't have the poverty rates that would allow that to be in those towns. But in a unified district, that opens that up. There's some other things about after-school programs, summer school. The sixth one, integration of technology. There's another case where, and I bring this up because when we talk about what you control in your budget, 75 to 80% is staffing. There's other issues that you have to deal with. And I've worked now, this is my 50th year, working with small boards. And every budget season thinking, we'd love to have a tech integration specialist. We'd love to have foreign language like some of the other schools. We'd love to have now behavioral support that many small schools don't have, and they drastically need it. This is a way to be able to share resources to be able to do that. We didn't plan on saving $300,000 when we consolidated special ed services. That was a mandate from the law that we had to consolidate special ed. We happened to save $300,000 because we looked at caseloads from 1 teacher to 7.5 students to 1 to 12 students. Not a big jump, but it really saved a lot of resources, a lot of money. And with that savings, we've been able to have behavioral support technicians, paras trained in behavioral support at all the schools now. We couldn't have done that before, because every time we get into a budget season, it's like $30,000 is going to jump our tax rate over the state cap, and we can't afford it. So it really is the program development that's driving this for us. There's a benefit in terms of the taxes, but in terms of equity for students, that's what this is really all about.
Anything else, guys? Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to all the school board members and to the superintendent and other people that are here for the work that you've done. You've taken on a monumental task, and hats off to you all of you, even those of you that are not sitting at the table. It's a monumental task, and I just want to say thank you. I know that you probably don't hear that enough, but seriously.
Good to hear.
What
did you say?
Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I'll just say change is incredibly, incredibly hard. And I would say that the vast majority of the people at the study committee table initially, they did not want to be there. They thought there were only going to be 1 or 2 meetings. In fact, the WSESU board, I think the majority of the members got together and signed a letter that we sent up to the legislature saying we do not like this act. But then it became law. And we are 4 towns, but our numbers are diminishing. Our poverty rates are going up. Schools will close if we don't do something, so why not take the opportunity to comply with the law and do something really cool and creative. So what we're proposing is not, some of us don't want to merge, but we will merge somehow. So why not do it in a way that hits all the things that we care about? So we're putting something in front of you, and you guys get to decide. All right?
And please spread the word throughout the community. Thank you all for coming. We wish all these seats were full, so
Yeah,
spread the word.
thank you very much, everyone. And for those, did you turn off? Did you? We're going to quickly adjust the numbers before I share it with you, the numbers on the proportion and hybrid model, so they're actually correct. Because, correct? It's already done. All right. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.